Immanuel Kant, the last major thinker that we have as part of this course on modern philosophy, was a German Enlightenment thinker. His name was Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant lived during the 18th century, died at the beginning of the 19th century. In 1804 he died, which makes him the closest living to us of all of the philosophers that we studied as part of this course. He was a professor in East Prussia, which is roughly modern-day Poland. And as a university professor, his life was largely uneventful and undramatic, says Father Frederick Copleston in his history. And so how interesting, we have this guy who didn't live a very exciting life. Other people, we can tell sorts of stories of, their parents and how it was that they did these travels and all sorts of things. Not the case with him. He was a professor in East Prussia. That was his world, undramatic, but how interesting that he had a dramatic influence on the world of thought. With Kant, his early writings were more scientific. We call it his pre-critical, the pre-critical phase of his life. Before 1781 was when his first major work went big. So before that, he was essentially just studying the thoughts of other people like Leibniz and Wolff. And he was lecturing on a number of topics, including logic, metaphysics, moral philosophy, physics, math, geography, anthropology, pedagogy, mineralogy. Must have been interesting to meet a guy like him. He preached on a number of topics until, in 1781, he published his Critique of Pure Reason. And after that, it was just one book after another on thinking about how it is that we as human beings think. Interestingly, he was accused by King Frederick William II of attacking biblical theology and of the fundamental principles of Scripture and Christianity. And so what happened? He said, you know what? I'm never writing on religion again. You don't have to worry about me writing on religion ever again. And from that point forward, it's essentially taking religion out of his writings, and let's just talk about the human being and our beliefs and what is good and bad, etc. He rejected various arguments for God's existence. So we're talking about God, this metaphysical. We said that he lectured for a while on metaphysics. So how do we know that God exists? There were 4 traditional arguments for God's existence. He rejected the first 3. The first argument is the ontological argument, which simply means that God is the ground for existence. God is being. Or God is being as being. God is esse qua esse. God is being. Kant said, wrong. Being is not a predicate. Father Jamie, is being? No, that's not a predicate. That's not a way to finish a sentence. Father Jamie is tall. Okay? We can talk about God using words that are predicates. Being is not a predicate. So that argument for God's existence, that God is the ground of all being, or that God is being, wrong. Don't go there. We can't use that argument. Okay, let's try another argument. What about the second argument that he rejected was the cosmological argument. How it is that God is the first independent cause of all things. So, Father Jamie is here. What caused Father Jamie to be here? His parents, okay? And the cause of his parents, his grandparents. Sorry, we can trace it back. God is the first cause that set every other effect in motion. Follow me? That's the cosmological argument. He said the challenge is, we can't demonstrate, even if there were a first cause that set everything else in motion, sounds great, nice theory, but how do we know that that first cause is the thing that you call God? Number 3, the teleological argument. The teleological argument is simultaneously proving the essence of God and the attributes of God, that God is and what God is at the same time. But he said, here's the challenge. It goes back to people like Descartes, who came up with this. If there's the spiritual and the body, how does the soul or the spirit influence the body? In the same way with God. If God is spiritual, how can a spiritual mind shape created matter? It was the same challenge that Descartes and the rationalists had. What's the interaction between the non physical, the metaphysical.
What line are you on, Father?
So that was the teleological argument, number 7. So Kant said the only possible argument for God's existence is that God is the grounds for the possibility of the idea of God. Now this is deep. God is the grounds of possibility. And this line will be followed by other German thinkers like Karl Rahner, greatest Catholic theologian of the 20th century. Kant said, we can't deny all possible existence without thinking, and thinking affirms the grounds of possibility. So in order for me to think, there has to be the grounds for the possibility of me thinking, which simply means that what are the grounds for the possibility of me thinking? We'll call that God. If you're calling that God, then that is the only rational argument for God. That God is the grounds for the possibility of me doing what I do. That's going to influence 20th and even 21st century theology. That God is the grounds within which we do everything that we do. God is the horizon. Karl Rahner would talk about it sort of this, God is, here we are. God is the infinite horizon. As I walk closer to the horizon, I take 2 steps closer to the horizon. How much closer am I to the horizon? I'm not any closer? No, because I took 2 steps forward, the horizon took 2 steps back. That's what Karl Rahner said. Karl Rahner said, God is this mystery that we can't approach and we can't wrap words around, because the moment you think you have God in your hands, or that you've described God with words, what you've described isn't God. God is that grounds that allows for the possibility of you to talk about God and the world and the soul and so many other things. God is what makes that possible. For the challenge with Kant is that, following the tradition of these empiricists, right? What we can see, what we can sense, what we can take in through our senses, we can trust. Everything that's beyond the senses, we just will never be able to agree on it. And so if anything exists beyond the senses, then there's no way for us to know it. There's no way for us to have any intuition of anything that's invisible, say. If something exists that's invisible, we'll never know it because it's beyond our senses. If there is an invisible thing standing beside me, I got news for you. I will never know it, and you will never know it. Why? Because it's invisible. Remember, one of his arguments against God's existence is, okay, how can the invisible, or how can the non-material influence the material? He argued that it can. He said, there's no way for us to know the super-sensible, the meta-sensible, the metaphysical, because our senses can only see the things of this world, hear the things of this world. And so the only knowledge that we can have of God is symbolic knowledge. We use words to try to describe God, but we know that what we're creating are just ideas or concepts. Whether there's anything out there that corresponds to that idea or that concept remains to be seen or known. We can't see or know anything that's beyond the physical. He said, principles of sensitive knowledge can't be extended from the sensible to supersensible realities, to metaphysical realities. So we can see and hear and experience the things of this world. We can't experience things that are not of this world. So we can't apply what we experience in this world to things that may not be of this world. He said we must be cautious about applying sensible concepts to supersensible ideas, and especially going from our sensible knowledge to universal principles, right? That we judge something to be good, and so God must be like the greatest good in the world, okay? Wait a minute, how did you just go from one thing to the other thing? Okay, we all understand what good is, but our understanding of the good is shaped by our experience of the world. How do we know that this highest good, the summum bonum, we call it, how do we know that exists? Does it have to exist? No. We get this idea of good in the world, but what makes you think that the highest good has to exist? He said we can't say of God, for instance, that whatever exists exists somewhere and at some point. Think about that for a moment. If God exists, then God must exist somewhere and at some time. God must exist right now. Okay, how can you say that of God? How do you know that God exists right now? That is, if God is beyond the senses, I can't see God, can't feel God, can't taste God. It's something that I can reason to, but it's nothing that I can take in through the senses. And so what's happening is we attempt to draw God into our world. Our world is bound by space and time, but hold on to your seats for a moment. Space and time do not exist, says Kant. Space and time do not exist. What happens is, what exists are my perceptions of space, everything that exists in space, and time, how it is that we're in time. What exists are your perceptions of space and time, but there is no space or time. They don't exist. All that exists are our perceptions of space and time. Space and time don't exist. Those are mental constructions that you, based on your senses, you've taken in information your whole life, and you've constructed these things that you call space and that you call time, and now you're trying to draw God, whatever God is, down into the space and time that you've created. That's problematic. He said space and time are phenomenal, the things that we make up. They're not things in themselves. Space doesn't exist. Time doesn't exist. You perceive them as existing. He said we can have no scientific knowledge of God, only symbolic knowledge, or an idea of what God could be like. But the question becomes, does my idea of God in any way resemble what God really is, presuming God really exists? I have an idea of God. How true to reality is my idea? That was deep speculation there. Let's pull back. Let's go back to the issue of ethics or morality. Even if we were not to look at the Bible or not to think about things like God, could we come up with the way that all of us could live through our reason? Could we just close our eyes and ears and come up with rules for how it is that we should all get along together? He came up with a rule. He called it a categorical imperative. An imperative is something that you have to do. Categorical means it's for everyone, everywhere. This is a categorical imperative. There is one rule for all human beings everywhere, and it is this. Act only on that maxim, that rule, through which you can at the same time will that that rule should become universal law. Ooh, we actually heard that during our course in ethics. Only do those things that you could wish were made universal laws or rules. So whatever you do, don't do it unless you would want to. If you were king of the world, you'd say, okay, I want everyone in the world to do this. Okay? Only do those things that you want everyone else in the world to do. That is the one categorical imperative, according to Kant, by which we should act. There is a correlate, a similar one. Act as if the rule of your action, the maxim of your action, were to become, through your will, a universal law of nature. If whatever it is that you're about to do, if you would wish for that to become a universal law that everyone would have to follow, or that would have to be followed in this world, then do it. If you're going to act contrary to that, you're going to lie. Okay, think about it for a moment. If you're about ready to lie, do you want lying to be like a rule of nature? Do you want to live in a world where everyone is lying to everyone and you never know what the truth is? No? Okay, then tell the truth. Don't do anything unless you can wish what you're doing to become a universal law. You wish everyone would tell the truth? Great, then tell the truth. The only rule that you live by, that we should live by, is what determines right or wrong. What is right is that I would wish to become universal law. For everyone to follow, for the world to follow. Like telling the truth, or not killing. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kill a person? Wait a minute. Would I want everyone else in this world to be killing everyone? Anyone else? No. Okay, so I'm only going to do those things that I could wish everyone else in this world did, or that I could wish would become a universal law. That's Kant. And with Kant, we come to the end of this scary, frightening course on modern philosophy, because we have lots of philosophers who thought many different things. Many of them who threw God out, threw out the baby with the bathwater, threw God out, had no place for God in their systems. Kant comes and says, a lot of the traditional arguments we've learned about how God exists, we can't know that God really exists except by one thing, and that is that if God is the grounds for the possibility of us thinking or doing what we're doing, then maybe God exists. If God is the grounds within which we do what we do. That's deep. Maybe God is not what we learned God was as a child, but if God is the grounds for the possibility of you doing what you do today, then that could be an argument for God's existence.